Welcome to Infinite Models. If you like building aircraft, any type of armor, how about prehistoric or current wildlife? Autos of all shapes and sizes and genres, seafaring subjects of all types, and figures, vignettes, and dioramas, then this group was made for you.
Okay, June of 1950, two understrength B-26 squadrons under, one group, two squadrons, understrength, 26 total flyable B-26s. North Koreans invade, they drive everybody down, and I mean, literally, if you know the Korean Peninsula, they pushed everything down to this little bitty little town on the southernmost tip called Pusan, Pusan, and they set up a defensive perimeter there to like hold on from being just literally pushed into the ocean at the Pusan perimeter. In the meantime, the 5th Air Force started flying interdiction and close air support missions and bombing missions using those B-26s out of Iwakuni, Japan. They had to fly from Japan all the way to Korea, all the way to the south end of Korea, and make these attacks. It was really taxing. Things were not going well. The 5th Air Force at that time, they had big plans. They were trying to move to an all-jet force, and so all the F-51 Mustangs were taken out of theater. They were bringing in F-80 Shooting Stars. They had the F-94 Starfires and aircraft along those lines, but they weren't built up yet, and they weren't at strength, and they weren't fully trained and ready to go. And Bob says relatively short trip, but not in a prop-driven airplane. The time to get there still took a while. It's not like jets today. In any event, it was a struggle. The F-51s were out. That left a handful of F-82 twin Mustangs and these 26 flyable B-26 B and C Invaders. And that's what we started the war with, from a U.S. Air Force point of view. And so down to the Pusan perimeter, virtually getting shoved off into the ocean. Well, then September 15th, General Douglas MacArthur, he leads this daring. They came up inside in the, what is that called, the Sea of, the China Sea, something like that, South China Sea, between China and Korea. And they came up and landed at Incheon. And they did this really daring amphibious assault, landed the, I think it was the 5th Marine Division at Incheon, and they go inland and they start cutting all of the supply lines off from the north to, the south of the Korean Peninsula to try to cut off the North Korean army, the Chinese communists, and they realized it. So they turn around and they start retreating up back north in a big hurry, because they didn't want to be cut off, and if you have a big pincher movement, they're fighting from the south and they come in from the north and then collapse and you're completely wiped out. They didn't want to go through that, so they start retreating hard. We start landing everything we can in country. The UN joins in. You got the Republic of Korea forces, UN forces, United States forces. We are putting in men, material, equipment, and we start shoving the North Koreans. We went way past the 38th parallel. And we shoved them all the way back up to the north, where they were literally trapped within the boundaries of the Pacific Ocean, the Yalu River, on China, and being completely and totally crushed within their own confines. And we started what was called, on November 24th, we started the Home by Christmas campaign. And so we launched this big offensive to be the final crushing blow of the North and destroy them. Well, 2 days after we started the Home by Christmas assault, thousands upon thousands of Chinese, infantry came pouring across the Yalu River. And it was obvious, because even Douglas MacArthur, in October, there were some skirmishes and Chinese raids across the Yalu, and there was evidence of buildup of Chinese forces, but they never entered the fray. And so that led Douglas MacArthur to announce in late October that the Chinese will never enter this conflict, And this was our chance to crush the North Koreans. And he was talking about, we might as well go fight the Chinese because we're going to have to fight them one day. So we might as well do it now. And all that was taking place in October, November 1950. We start the Home by Christmas offensive on the 24th. And the Chinese, they went against Douglas MacArthur's wishes. And they started pouring thousands of men into the fight. And it was obvious that the Chinese felt that they could really earn our defeat through sheer manpower. Human wave after human wave of people thrown into the fray. But there were so many that it put the U.S. and UN forces on a, hasty and as organized as you can, do in that kind of environment, retreat back to the south. The front lines in Korea stabilized, ironically, right around the 38th parallel. And late winter in 1951, February or so, things had really started to stabilize. And by the early spring, we had stable lines and things kind of became entrenched. And so there we were kind of at a stalemate in the spring of 1951, ironically, right where the whole daggone mess had started, with the peninsula divided between north and south at the 38th parallel. Well, with all that manpower in North Korea now fighting, the Chinese realized that the only way for them to keep that front stable and perhaps perform some more offensives as they look forward, it would require humongous logistical and supply line challenges for them. So what the Chinese did was, in order, they had all the rail lines in North Korea that basically ran north to south. There were some that were lateral, but most of their rail lines ran north to south. You think about the peninsula and how it's shaped. So, and it's all mountain ranges, and so unless you're digging tunnels, you're basically running your trains north and south. So they had all the rail lines, and they were basically in the center and eastern part of this country, and then on the western part of the country, you had a lot of roads. Not like, you don't think like highways and interstates, but these are cut through, in the valleys between these mountainous ranges along the western coast. You had a number of these highways with which to supply their army. And so in order for the Chinese to take the pressure off the railways, they were sending truck convoy after truck convoy, in the west. Well, to keep the pressure off the truck convoys from marauding, U.S. and UN aircraft, they were still flowing trains like crazy down the center and eastern part of the country. And then to relieve pressure from all that, they literally had armies of, men in coolie hats with the bamboo sticks carrying supplies on their backs south to keep their army, sending them bullets, band-aids, and beans to fight the war. And so the B-26 Invader, its primary mission, after things settled into that stalemate along the 38th parallel in the spring of 51, they became primarily night marauders. Their job was going after the supply lines. They were doing train line cuts. They were train busting, going after convoys, looking for buildups of personnel that could be, staging places to move materials south. Howdy, Stanley. Good to have you in here, my friend. Glad you joined us. So the night intruders was really their focus. But along the way, the B-26 Invaders started getting some other additional missions that were a little different, a little bit out of their comfort zone. And they did things like they sent these crazy floodlights. And these floodlights were about the size of a napalm bomb, and they would mount to a station, a stores rack, under primarily the left wing. And this light was so bright and the intensity so hot, they could only have them on for approximately 50 seconds, less than a minute, and then they had to shut them off while they flew for 5 minutes to cool down enough to turn it back on again. And so the part of the purpose in them they got these things, the Navy was using them. The Navy shared a bunch of them with the Air Force, the 13th Bomb Squadron, the 37th Bomb Squadron, the 8th Bomb Squadron. They all received some of these lights. And they were doing this night interdiction. And what they were trying to do was they would use these lights, and you would have an invader come down and light up, and they would do so like flash, 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 steady, flash, flash, while other invaders would come in from perpendicular to that track and attack the things that they were lighting up. Well, the problem was, the North Koreans and the Chinese weren't exactly dumb. When you got something lighting you up, the way you defend yourself from it is turn out the light. I don't recall the name of them, Mark, but they might have been, but these things were very high intensity and very high heat. And again, like I said, they were the size of a napalm bomb canister, so they weren't small. They caused a lot of drag when they put them on the airplane, so their top speed, their loiter time over target areas, and all that was reduced. And then the pilots who did fly those missions learned very quickly that you became the biggest, baddest target of opportunity within 60 square miles, because everybody saw that light, and every gunner in North Korea went at that light. So they didn't fly with those but for about 30 days, and then got rid of them. Comments from guys that were in squadrons, boy, I'm glad I never flew that mission, dodge that bullet, or all those bullets. But they were trying things with the A-26s to expand their missions from night intruder, truck busting, train busting, stuff like that. And so, as it turns out, the Strategic Bomber Command, the strategic bomber guys, and at that time we're talking B-29s, right? So the strategic bomber guys had a vision to knock out this tremendous. They had a power plant. It was massive on the Yalu River at Sinuiju. And so at the Sinuiju Power Plant, they wanted to take this thing out. The problem is that if you look at the Korean Peninsula, and the Yalu River kind of ran from southwest to a northeast direction between China, communist China, and the Korean Peninsula. And so the Yalu River ran along here, and the Sinuiju plant was here, and all of this is mountainous terrain, right? So when you fly up from the south, we're not allowed to fly over China. So you can't come in, otherwise you end up over China, turning around, and people were going to be court-martialed, run out of the military, and so on. No flying over China. So the ingress and the egress were kind of perpendicular to the river. And since all this is mountainous terrain, and then there's the valley where the Yalu River was, what the Chinese and the North Koreans did was they stationed a series of searchlights and guns at the tops of these hills overlooking the Yalu River. So if anybody came up the river looking to try to attack the power plant at Sinuiju, they would have to go through a gauntlet of searchlights and anti-aircraft guns. And so Strategic Bomber Command realized that sending their bombers was just, throwing them piecemeal into a gauntlet, literally. And their plan for this mission was they wanted 90 minutes worth of continuous bombers over the target. So they were launching B-29s so that they got over the target at 5-minute intervals. So that meant they were going to put one bomber over the target in all of those searchlights and all of those guns by themselves every 5 minutes. And the consideration for the survivability to do that, to bomb this power plant, they just realized they were going to send literally 18 or 19 bombers, 5-minute intervals, first plane every 5 minutes for 90 minutes till you got to the last plane. There's literally 19 bombers. They were sending them all to their death. So the strategic bomber guys reached out to the 13th Bomb Squadron, and they said, hey, we're thinking about doing this, but we need some people to interdict and cause some distractions and take out some lights and anti-aircraft guns in these mountains leading up to Sinuiju so that we can attack and destroy that, power source. Well, the 13th Bomb Squadron went, we're in. No thought, no second thought. You know, here these guys are like, woo, a mission other than tank or train busting rather. And these nutheads jump right in. And so what they did was they got together 6 of the B model B-26s with the hard noses. Most of them had 6 guns, some of them had 8. Most of them had 6 guns. So between the guns in the nose, the turret overhead, in the wings, you had forward 14 firing 50 cal machine guns. That's an awful lot of lead to be laying down somewhere, right? And then they had, what they did was they used the anti-personnel fragmentation bombs. And the way those things were loaded up on the Invader was they came in sticks of 6. You had, 2 rows of 3 on a stick, and the stick mounted to the interior wall in the bomb bay. And when you did a release, it would literally release a stick, and those things would come apart on the way down. So you had 6 individual bombs heading to the target. They were high fragmentation. They weren't like armor piercing, they were anti-personnel. So they're going after anti-aircraft guns and they're going after searchlights. They're not in hardened shelters. So they got these sticks of the anti-personnel bombs together, and then they took piano wire and they put 2 sticks together and put each pair of sticks on the bomb rack. So they were carrying twice as many of these as they normally would have. And this is how they configured themselves for the mission. Now the timing had to be kind of precise. And what they set up was so that 2 invaders would arrive in the area just immediately before the bombers would show up. So that when the bombers, who were much higher altitude, started to roll in and they could be heard, the searchlights would come on. The invaders at the lower level, hiding in the the valleys and the hills on the approach, that's when they would pounce. And they would go after primarily the lights, because at least if you take the lights out, now the guns are shooting blindly, just mainly. So they were after lights, they were after guns as secondary targets. And so they had it so that the B-26 could stay in the area for about 20 minutes. So they had the first 2 in there for 20 minutes. When they pulled out, the next 2 were in. When they were out, the next 2 were in. And when they pulled out, the first 2 had refueled and rearmed and were back, and they were in. And so this is what they set up as this ballet of, if you ask me, what did I talk about last week and the week before, right? The Wild Weasel missions and the surface-to-air missile suppression. And here these guys they were going in and doing some of the first, anti-aircraft gun suppression with the searchlights. So it was almost like, Wild Weasel concept, if you ask me. And so here they go. The B-26 arrives. Here rolls in the B-29s, and the lights all come on. And the B-26s start wreaking holy havoc on all the lights as they come up. They're dropping these sticks of anti-personnel high frag bombs. They are unloading with the 14 forward firing 50 cal machine guns, lighting up everything. And the bomber stream continued unabated for 90 minutes over that power plant. Dropping bomb. Not a single bomber was lost. Not a single B-26 was lost. They go flying back to their bases and they land. And a big, Bravo Zulu, right, was sent out to the B-26 crews from the Strategic Bombing Command. Hey, great job, guys, thank you. And they immediately turned around and set up another mission for the following night. They're like, we want to go back, do it again, make sure we got this, very important strategic target. They couldn't do bomb damage assessment. And you might be hearing me going, why didn't they do bomb damage assessment? Well, by this point in the war, right, we're now in the fall of 1951. It's over a year we've been in combat. Guess what was thrown into the breach by then? The dreaded MiGs. And they had started dividing the areas in the north up by colors. And that area in the north along the Yalu River to the far west, that was the purple zone. And the purple zone had a name most of you are very familiar with. You've heard it 100 times in history if you've heard it once, and that is MiG Alley. And so the purple zone was MiG Alley, and you couldn't send like a reconnaissance airplane up there unarmed into MiG Alley and expect to get good bomb damage visual assessment. So their alternative was, we'll just schedule another mission. And so they set it up for the following night, 6 more B-26s, 19 more B-29s, same ingress, same approach, same egress, don't fly over China, come right up the mountains, knock out the lights, knock out as many guns as you can, and we will flatten this power plant on the Yalu River at Sinuiju. Well, they arrived. And the B-29s are just a few minutes out, and the searchlights come on. They were all on the north side of the river. Because of the nature of the mission and where they were at, and the fact that it was supposed to be a secret, and they weren't allowed to talk on the radio. It was radio silence. If anybody came off the radios and broke the silence, the mission would have been aborted, the whole thing scrubbed, and everybody returned to base. Every pilot there and that came there independently had to make a decision for themselves. Allow the lights to shine and the guns to just literally rake the B-29s at will, or violate the no-fly zone and cross the Yalu River into China to perform the suppression on the lights and the guns. Every single B-26 crew made the same decision. And the lights were shut out and the guns were destroyed, and the B-29s flattened the power plant at Sinuiju unscathed. They all flew home. And in the after-action reports and in the reporting following that mission, every single B-26 crew independently noted that all the targets were on the south side of the Yalu River. And the Air Force B-29 crews, they said the same thing. No one was ever the wiser. And ironically in this, China never raised a stink about the fact that the searchlight, the setups, the guns, the emplacements, the military, the people were attacked in China on their side of the river by American crews. Never raised a stink about that. That part I'll never understand. But 2 nights in a row, missions like that had never been flown before, into an area that, even the MiGs were trying some night raiding, night tactics, and they could have gone after the B-29s, they could have gone after the B-26s, they could have gone after both. But they went right into the heart of MiG Alley after this very large, massive power plant on the Yalu River, a hydroelectric plant, and destroyed it in 2 consecutive nights of bombing, with the B-26s sitting down on the deck, taking out lights and gun emplacements using piano-wired stigs of anti-personnel fragmentation bombs and a lot of 50 cal machine guns.
We hope you have enjoyed this Infinite Models presentation.